My name's Jonathan Else, I'm Competition Executive at the Technology Strategy Board as well. And I will take you through the funding, looking at project costs, grant percentages, and then finishing with a section just to take you through some general housekeeping aspects of how to register, navigating through the website, and how to upload your documents, before we finish with another kind of question and answer session. So looking at funding, I'll take you through funding rules, looking at the types of organisations that can apply to this competition, what we mean by collaboration, which sounds relatively straightforward, I know, going through levels of participation in grants, minimum grants and things of that nature, funding criteria specific to this competition, and obviously, as I just mentioned, finishing off with the housekeeping points. So the types of organisation eligible for this competition: businesses for SMEs, and as Barry mentioned before, these must be business-led collaborative projects. It can be inclusive of research organisations, and under that research organisation bracket, shall we say, includes universities, non-profit distributing research technology establishments, research council institutes, catapults, and public sector organisations, is an important note, and charities doing research activity are not eligible unless they apply as industry partners. So that's probably the key point on this slide. The grant we offer is dependent upon the type of research being undertaken and the type of participant. So on this screen, hopefully it illustrates what we mean by that. So businesses obviously performing economic activity, pre-industrial research, so that would be the feasibility strand of this competition, can claim up to 75% of their individual costs. Industrial research, so for the early stage or the late stage, SMEs can claim up to 60% of their individual costs. And the important note on there is that large organisations are not eligible, so SMEs must be leading the projects, working with other SMEs or research organisations. In the same way, research organisations can claim 100% of their costs. For universities, this is the 80% full economic cost figure. That's what they can claim all of. Other research organisations, such as your catapults, research technology organisations, can claim up to 100% of their costs, but again must be non-profit distributing and show how they're going to disseminate the project results. And that's not the project's entirety, that's just their involvement within the project they need to disseminate. So I think in question 3 about exploitation and dissemination, you need to be extremely clear, if you're working with university partners or research organisations, how they plan to disseminate and exploit beyond obviously competition. Looking at levels of participation, so for this competition, all of the strands have one project cap, and essentially that's a 50-50 split, as we call it. So the combination of total research partners, whether that's catapults, universities, the combination of all of their total costs cannot be greater than 50% of the overall project. I've got a worked example of a few slides just to hopefully illustrate what we mean by that project split. There is reference to this in the guidance for applicants as well, so if you want to double check and go back and have it in writing, as Barry said, if it's not written down, it's not happened. So there is more information in the guidance. What do we mean by collaboration? And I know it's relatively straightforward. It's essentially two people working together. So whether that's business to business and SME to SME, or business to research, it has to be at least two partners working together claiming grant. An effective collaboration, and this isn't a strict rule, this isn't a percentage that we enforce, it's just an indication of what we mean by an effective collaboration. So what we wouldn't like to see is projects coming into the competition where the lead partner is incurring 90% of the costs and you have another partner on board just to make them collaborative and eligible. So essentially, what we would like to see is no more than one partner taking more than or incurring more than 70% of the project costs. Otherwise, it's not considered a true balanced consortium. Minimum grant. So this was essentially a rule that was implemented towards the end of 2012. Essentially, prior to September 2012, we had a rule in place where every single partner in the consortium must claim a minimum of 10% grant. And the feedback we received, we do listen to you, I know. The feedback we received is that puts off a lot of large organisations who wanted to be involved in projects and work in projects, but it would cost them more administration than they would receiving the grant, so it would deter them from being involved in projects. So what we've done is we've changed that rule. So essentially you can work with partners in the consortium who are incurring costs and contributing, who don't want to receive grant. That's absolutely fine. Put them down in the finance summary table at the bottom of your application forms, so list them there, what their costs are, obviously zero grant, and they won't need to be included, or they won't be included in any correspondence between the technology strategy boards and yourselves. They won't be included in any conditional offer letters, and you do not need to complete a finance form for them. So there's relatively little involvement in terms of correspondence between technology strategy board and those partners. I mentioned a worked example earlier on, so this is what I meant. So just as an example of a £500,000 project for a early or late stage industrial research award, led by an SME, £250,000 project costs, so they're the costs that they're incurring, of which they can claim 60% for. So they would receive £150,000 grant, and they would need to find £100,000 match funding contribution. Research organisations, the example on the screen is based on a university. Their costs are £250,000, so that's that 80% full economic figure, and they can receive 100% funding for that. So hopefully it works out that we will be offering more grant at project level. Again, this example is found online and in the guidance, so if you do want to refer back to it and check, it's all available online. So I'll take you through some project costs now, starting with the business and non-academic partners. I'll take you through eligible project costs and then completing the industrial partner finance form, then going on to the academic side and what we would look for them to complete in terms of forms and the JES process. Eligible project costs, so essentially all of those categories you see on the screen are eligible categories in terms of your costs. The industrial partner finance forms is an Excel sheet, and there'll be a tab for each one of these categories. So you can claim for labour, overheads, materials, capital equipment usage, subcontracts, travel and subsistence, and importantly, other costs you can also claim for. Contributions in kind, and I know there was a question earlier about contributions in kind. Essentially, a contribution in kind has to come from outside of your consortium, as Barry said. So there cannot be a contribution in kind within your consortium. It has to be given to the project from outside of its consortium partners. And you can claim for IP filing costs of up to £5,000. Ineligible project costs. Unfortunately, there are some ineligible costs you cannot claim for. So input or output VAT, interest charges, bad debts and profits you can't claim for, unfortunately. Hire purchase, profit earned by a subsidiary or an associate undertaking work subcontracted you cannot claim for. Inflation and contingency. I won't continue reading more, you can all read as well as I can. But the important one on this screen is the independent accountant's report fees. And with some projects, you may be required to complete an independent accountant's report either before the first claim and before the final claim, or both. And unfortunately, you cannot claim for those fees. And on that point, we don't recommend any independent accountants to use. It's at your discretion, but it's costs that you cannot claim back for. So, looking at the partner finance forms, you will need to complete one of these for every partner in the consortium who's not under the research organisation bracket. So any partner who's claiming grant must complete an industrial partner finance form. And again, the important thing is that the figure in that form matches what you put in your application form finance summary table. If there is a discretion, it may affect the offer letter we give to you. So if you get through to that point and we offer you a conditional offer letter, and I hope that we do, if there's a discrepancy, you might not receive the level of grant you're expecting. So please make sure there's consistency along the categories and the costs throughout all of the documents that you upload and submit. And as I said before, there's a tab for each of those cost categories in that partner finance form. I'll take you through these in a second. And the important thing with your partner finance form is there's a status or a document status. In the top hand bar, it will say document status, either incomplete in red or complete in green. Please make sure that it's complete in green before you upload on that noon deadline. So coming on to the actual form itself, with each sheet for each cost category, at the top it will say, does your project incur labour? Just select yes. When you select yes, it will auto-fill all of these tables and cells. So labour costs, so just list down everyone in the consortium or everyone in the project working down. And that's not specific names, that's just roles, so project management, technician, just to name a few examples. How many people there are, their gross annual salary, how many days they're working on the project, and that will calculate the total labour cost for obviously each person at different levels within your projects. So it has to be staff working directly on your projects, need to be paid through a PAYE or business payroll, whether that's internal business payroll or an external business payroll that you use, it has to go through a business payroll, and can include national insurance, pensions and non-discretionary costs. Unfortunately, you cannot claim for dividends, bonuses or non-productive time. Moving on to overheads, so in the same way, select yes if everything applies to your project, which I'm sure you do. And there are 3 ways you can calculate your overheads. You can take a flat rate, 20% of your labour costs. You can use the built-in overheads calculator, which is embedded into the Excel form, or you can do your own calculations. So it's completely up to you. If you do use your own calculations, make sure that it's clearly labelled when you upload your documents what that document is. So eligible overheads, indirect labour costs, so board and senior management. So if you do have board members or senior management who you want advice from, or who will help you and steer the project, and not necessarily be too involved in the project, you can claim for a fraction of their time. And you can also claim for admin and support staff. Recruitment costs you can claim for, so if you need to bring anybody on board for your projects, you can claim for the recruitment costs. And just as a probably important note, is that a risk? So recruitment's not a certainty. In your application forms under the risk strategy, it might be sort of relevant to include recruitment costs if you've not got people in place yet. General supplies and IT are eligible. Corporate fees and expenses, site expenses and utilities. And again, there's more detail about these specific categories in our guidance. Ineligible overheads, so anything basically to do with your day-to-day running of your business, not directly associated with your project. So production or service delivery costs, marketing and sales, non-bookable R&D, entertainment and hospitality, new IP protection costs, and any headings that are being charged directly within the project, such as training and travel and subsistence. Material costs, so again, does your project incur material costs, yes or no? If you select yes, it will generate those cells underneath. And that has to be materials directly used in the project, so if you need to go and buy equipment, these will be your material costs or materials that you use. Essentially, just list them down, how many of them are there, and the value, and that will calculate a total for you. Relatively straightforward. Capital equipment usage, again, for equipment directly used in your projects, you can claim for. Again, at the top, select yes. List down what the equipment is and a description of what its use is. The value pre your project, the amount of days that you'll be using the equipment in your project for, and the end value, and that will calculate a usage figure for you. So for every piece of equipment you're using in your project that you currently have, that's what you can use in terms of the usage costs for that. And it must be used in the project or shared with sort of day-to-day production, include your resale value. Subcontract costs, as Barry mentioned earlier on, subcontracting, especially in this competition, will be, or probably will be, quite high. The important thing is that you explain and justify what those subcontractors are, who they are, why they're important to deliver what you aim to deliver with your project. So with this sheet, do you have subcontractors, yes or no? List up who they are, what they're doing, the importance of that subcontract to the success of your project, and the value and cost of that subcontract. Travel and subsistence, again, directly linked to your project. Ideally, what we would not like to see is meetings in Vegas or anything like that. So just list down whether it's weekly meetings, monthly meetings, whether you need to travel to see consortium partners. You can claim for those costs as it's directly attributable to your project. Other costs, so essentially anything else incurred as a result of the project which is not included in any of the other categories which I've been through. And just make sure that you're not double counting in any of the categories. It will increase your project costs and essentially affect how much grant you can take. So make sure that you're not double counting in any of the other categories. If you're unsure whether a cost should be in one category or the other, just contact us. So moving on to the academic side. So why JES? JES stands for the Joint Electronic Submission System. And we don't have too much involvement in the JES process. We don't own the JES process, we don't run it. We just require the output document to show that it's been through that research council process and it's been approved. Universities will know what this is. This won't be anything that's new to them. If they're unsure, I will put up a couple of contacts to use. If you do have any queries around the JES process, JES system, you can contact them directly. But essentially, it's just our reassurance that you've been through, or the academic partners have been through that process, their costs have been approved. Eligible project costs. So academic partners can claim 100% of their full economic figure. The other 20% does not go onto the partner finance forms or the application finance summary table. So at the bottom of your application forms, if you've got university partners, their contribution should be 0, and their grant they're looking to receive should be that 8% full economic cost figure. They will also need to complete an academic partner finance form, which is just a one-page Excel sheet, and should mirror the costs which are in the JES output document. So it's the normal JES elements. Again, as I said, we don't run that process, we don't have too much control over it, so if you do have any questions regarding the JES process, please contact them directly. But it's not just the financial information they would need to submit, it's the justification of resource and the pathways to impact. But again, your academic partners will usually be aware of the JES process, the requirements of what to go through. It can take some time to go through that process, so if you are looking to work with academic partners, it's probably worth just giving them a nudge and making sure they look at that and start doing that as soon as possible, really. And the final section before I finish, which you'll probably be glad to hear, is about submitting the application form and the way forward, just some general housekeeping and how to navigate through the websites. There are essentially 6 steps to the submission process. I'll take you through each of these steps individually. But as shown before, we have a competitions page, which will have an individual tab to show all of the competitions we currently have open, all of the competitions which are soon to open, and all of our previous competitions. So it's in this open competitions tab which you will find the Biomedical Catalyst Round 7. There'll be a specific competition page for that competition, which will look something like this. I know this is not the exact one, this is just an example. But on that specific page, you will be able to locate the generic guidance for applicants, so that's just your project cost documents, and if you're looking at research categories, definitions of what we mean by industrial research or pre-industrial, the generic guidance, as we call it, and also the specific competition guidance, which is the 20-page guidance that Barry was referring to earlier, which is specifically designed to help you with this competition and completing your application form for this competition. This is the place that you will go to register and download any documents such as the competition brief and flyer and whatnot. So it's all there to help you. We tried to put it all in one place just to make it simple. So moving on to registration. So it's important that you do register whether you're still unsure whether you're looking to apply or not. Register. If you miss that registration deadline, then you have no opportunity to submit anyway. It's better to register and not follow through than it is to sort of sit on the fence and not make a decision. So register on the websites. Within 48 hours, you'll receive a notification email with your individual application form on it, with a unique ID application number. If you do want to submit multiple applications, which is fine, please don't reuse that one application form. When you upload, our system will only read that based on its one unique application number. So if you're using that same form multiple times, it'll only take the latest upload. So if you want to submit multiple projects, which you can do, please contact us and request an additional form. So when you log in, so on that email address with the application form on it, will give you access to an FTP site and a secure FTP site login. So when you go onto the FTP URL, you'll have the public documents, so just an example of a collaboration agreement, conditional offer letter, templates. You can see our general terms and conditions, just some generic documents for you to use. You'll find your partner finance form and academic partner finance forms on there, so that's where you can find those if you need to complete them for your partners. And on the right-hand screen, you can see the login section, which is where you log into your individual unique area. When you complete your documents, the system we have is probably dated at best, but essentially it works. So it's important that when you're completing or uploading your documents, you keep the unique application number, so you don't try and change that, and that it's submitted in a Word file format, so either .doc or .docx. The appendices need to begin with appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C, just to obviously name a few examples, but you need to name them Appendix just so it's clear what they are, and need to be supplied in a PDF format. And the finance forms are all Excel forms and should remain in Excel forms. When you come to upload your documents, so when you log into your specific unique area, it will ask you to select yes to some sort of general terms and conditions. Once you enter into your secure area, there'll be a download tab and an upload tab. When you go to upload your documents, obviously click the upload tab. That will take you through to upload your forms. And the important thing, if I just go back on that actually, is when you upload your documents, there won't be anything to say, congratulations, we've received your upload or anything like that. There won't be a pop-up to say, upload received. So the important thing, if you're unsure, is to either check the file size or log out and log back in. If you can see the documents there, then we can see it. If you're still really unsure, just contact us to say, we've uploaded, can you see it? Once you receive your notification, if you are successful, there's a number of steps between that notification email and starting your projects. So essentially within 3 to 4 weeks following that successful notification, we will issue a conditional offer letter based on obviously the figures that you've given in your application form and finance forms. You would need to return those documents along with some other information such as financial forecasts and project plans. We will then hold some sort of viability checks just to go through your project costs, making sure that you're claiming for what you can claim for, you're not double counting, just iron out any creases, so there will be some correspondence back and forth between the Technology Strategy Board and the new partner. Once everything's been agreed and sorted, we will issue a grant confirmation letter, And it's on that grant confirmation letter that you will need to sign and agree and give your project start date. And importantly, please don't start your projects before you've signed and returned that project's start date and grant confirmation letter. If you're incurring any costs before your start date or before we've received that grant confirmation letter signed, you cannot claim for those costs. So if you do start your projects early, you do so at your own risk. Once we've received that signed grant confirmation letter with your project start date, you are sort of free to start. You'll also receive feedback, as Barry said. So this is designed to be constructive. Whether you're successful or not, you will receive feedback. So we want the process to be beneficial to you, whether you're successful or not. We hope you are successful. Take it on board. There may be differences in opinions. There may be people who have interpreted your application form in different ways. That's not uncommon. They're assessed remotely. People may just have different views on things. The feedback will be uploaded to your secure FTP site area. It won't be emailed to anyone for obvious reasons. If it's got commercial or sensitive information in there, we can't be seen to be emailing those. So it will be uploaded to your secure area before the date that's on the guidance for applicants. To summarise the submission, so two-stage competition process. So essentially there's 2 rounds of assessment before going to a MAC panel or major awards committee interview. Must be SME business-led and can be single or collaborative. Project sizes, I won't go through these in too much detail, you can all see that we've been through them earlier and they're also online in the guidance. But the difference, or the key thing for this one, is the difference in forms. So the expression of interest stage is a 6-question application form, and only that, so no appendices or finance forms needed. And if you are invited to the full stage, that's when you complete the full 10-question marked application form, and you'll also need to do your appendices and finance forms. The conditional offer letter, there's a template on your FTP site, as I said earlier, so you can look at this in more detail, but essentially, as you can see on the screen, these are the things that are covered in that conditional offer letter. So the total grant amount would be included, obviously not in that template, the payment terms, so how we pay you throughout your projects, state aid obligations, the role of the sort of lead partner, exploitation, publicity, just some sort of key points. Collaboration agreement. And with most competitions, this document is something which holds up the process following your notification email more than anything else. And especially if you're working with 3, 4 partners, I'm not saying that you are, but if you do, agreeing this collaboration agreement can take some time. So even at this point, when you're starting to put your applications together, it may well be worth just agreeing ownership of IP, project management, who's going to be involved in the consortium. We're aware that between stages people may drop out and people may come on board. Ideally not too much. But this agreement can take some time. We don't get involved in any of that agreement. We don't help with IP and helping negotiate. That's at your own discretion, but it can take some time. So that's important to take note of and is worth probably looking at alongside completing your application. If you are successful, we'll invite you to a new projects workshop, and this is where you'll have an opportunity to come into Swindon for a day, and we'll take you through all of the project process, essentially, so how you would submit your claims online on our Connect system, so you're familiar with that going forwards. And more importantly, it's an opportunity to meet your monitoring officer. And it's extremely important that you have a good relationship with your monitoring officer. Essentially, they will come and meet with you quarterly, usually, and make sure that you're on track, whether there's any changes, and help you keep in the right direction based on, obviously, the project plan and financial forecast you submitted before you started. We know that projects change. There may be environments you may need to move costs from one category to the other. That's not uncommon. But it's your monitoring officer who will need to approve that through a environment process. So having a good relationship with your monitoring officer, making sure they're aware of what you're doing, what stages you're at, what you're aiming to deliver and key points, is quite crucial to the success of your project. So that's probably the most important aspect of that new projects workshop. But again, as I said, you get to learn how to submit your claims online and approve it in that process. Grant claims and payments. We pay quarterly in arrears. So before your first claim, you may well have 3-4 months, especially if you're a small micro company or an SME, putting cash flow together or preparing your cash flow for that first claim might be an important factor when you come through your project management. We pay quarterly in arrears, as I said, so that first period may be quite difficult in terms of cash flow. So it's important maybe to take that into account. We can only pay costs that have been incurred and paid. And as I said, your monitoring officer will approve any costs or claims that you put forward to make sure that you've incurred those costs, and may be subject to an independent audit, which you cannot claim for. But that's normally between the first and last claims. But that will be put into your terms and conditions of your conditional offer letter. So that may vary slightly. Projects are monitored usually on a quarterly basis. So that's when you meet your monitoring officer, just to have an update, keep on track, and they can help you with your relationship between the technology strategy board and your projects. We've tried to put together some top tips, whether they're helpful or not, that's for you to decide. But we've tried to put some things together just as a general overview to help you out. So answer the questions fully as much as you can. There is limited space in the application forms. You quickly run out of space. Make sure that it's clear and concise. Number your questions and sections just to help with the assessors when they're going through your application form, so they can track through exactly where you're addressing key points. Use capitals obviously where correct to do so, but don't make it sound like you're shouting them. So reviewers wouldn't like it if you're constantly using exclamation marks, capital letters and so forth, or acronyms and jargon. Make sure that it's clear. Ideally, get someone else to read your application form, and if they can interpret it and understand what it is that your project's doing, that's a good indicator that obviously submitting it would be a good point. Quantification and justification throughout your application form is absolutely key. And that's feedback we get from sectors across all competitions. That's not just specifically to the Biomedical Catalyst. So if you are putting in market figures or anything like that, you need to justify where you got those figures from, how you calculated them, quantify any costs that you put in, why they're important, how you calculate them, are they realistic. It's that reassurance to the assessors that they're looking for. So you need to convince them that you clearly quantified and justified any evidence that you put in your application form. And don't leave your submission to the deadline. We have multiple competitions closing at the same time. Please don't upload your documents at 10 to 12 on that day. The systems can slow down, and if you've got a number of documents for each of your project applications, multiple people uploading at the same time, multiple competitions doing the same thing, just don't leave it to the last minute. Ideally the day before or first thing on that morning. It can slow down, so just as a key point, don't leave it to the last minute. And more importantly, use the guidance for applicants. It's there to help. The amount of information in there is more than Barry and I have covered today, so when you're completing application forms, it would be great to have the guidance for applicants with you and the competition brief alongside that. But essentially that's it for me. So if you do have any questions, we can take them now, and in the same way as earlier, just raise your hand and we can bring a microphone to you. No questions? Oh. Too good to be true.
Just about costs, as stated in the expression of interest application, how closely would the reviewers for the second stage expect those costs to align with the expression of interest form? Might it change?
It can change, absolutely. That's not uncommon. What we wouldn't like to see, what we wouldn't like to see is too much change. If it's completely different, if it increases by 30–40%, essentially it could be viewed as an entirely new project. So if you have made it through to the full stage, it's probably not good to start changing too much, but we're aware that if you receive feedback to say you could do with having a partner in this space in your consortium, that would boost your project, then by all means bring them on board, and that would change your costs. So unless there's something specifically to say you need to bring such and such on board, we wouldn't expect to see too much in terms of cost shifts, cost changes, but if there is, it's not a justification for us to kind of reject it or mark it down.
What I'd say a little bit more is that if it's plus or minus up to 10%, then yeah, not a problem. If you're looking at between 10 and 15% either way, then I'd expect you to have a conversation with Elaine in this to explain the rationale behind that. If you've got to bring in a new partner, that's strengthening, ask for your feedback, well, we appreciate that. If you're getting over 15%, then we'd start to wonder if this is really the same project. It's probably put into figures the way John's just described it.
Just a quick one. Can you add freedom to operate costs to the application?
If it's directly as a result of your project, yes. In a general rule, any costs incurred as a direct result of your project you can essentially claim for. Obviously, excluding the categories I've specifically covered. But as a general rule, that's eligible.
And no, just a general one. I was wondering if the application process is a bit more user-friendly. In terms of when you're adding text to a document, it's a bit of a nightmare because you usually have to end up putting everything in a Word document and copying and pasting it because the document itself doesn't allow you to edit it inside the document. Can we bear in mind?
I would love to say yes, but I can't. So essentially, it'd probably be similar to other applications you've submitted.
Unfortunately, at the moment, there is a freeze on government spending on IT, which is what we need to do to develop a system that would put you online all the way through to, from the application to the assessment to actually going straight through to the claim procedure on _connect. We'd love that. But unfortunately, these times, when you think of the money that needs to be spent elsewhere on healthcare rather than computer systems. So.
I just thought I would mention something on the IP, which Barry will, I'm sure, more up to date on it. I think there might be a 5,000 limitation on spend for IP.
IP final costs is about £5,000.
Just a quick question about payment. It's delayed until it's sort of in arrears after the first quarter. What sort of turnaround time is there then once payment is approved?
The process is, so you would submit your claims online and update your forecast going forwards. Submit that, would be then for your monitoring officer to go online onto his Connect or her Connect account and review those, submit them. Once they've submitted it, it would take normally probably about 2 weeks between that and payment. But there can be some delay if your monitoring officer says, no, I'm not quite sure what those costs are for. They may reject it back for you to amend it and go forward. So there's not a strict point, but once the monitoring officer is approved, it's normally about 2 weeks. Have we got any questions online?
So I represent a contract research organisation specialising in small molecule drug discovery. So we would be participating as one of those subcontractors. You mentioned about a collaboration agreement between the collaborators. For us, does that apply? It doesn't?
No, it's only specific partners in the consortium, so subcontractors won't be involved in the collaboration agreement.
Fine, thank you.
Okay. Well, if that's it for questions, I'm sure Barry will wrap up. But thank you very much for coming down. Good luck with your application forms. And if you need us, we're at the other end of a phone call or an email. So, Barry, then if you want to finish up.
All I was going to say is I think we're about 15 or 20 minutes early before lunch, so John and I are going to be around. I know Elaine's here all day, but John and I have a 4-hour drive back to Swindon to get ready for more meetings in the morning. And I can see people laughing because they know we've got the other 80 competitions that are coming this year to start looking at. Give it a go. You know, everyone says you've got to be in it to win it with the lottery and things like that. It's the same as this. It's always a good thing to apply. Your first application, don't get down if it's not successful. There are people out there who've applied to 13, 14 competitions that I see a lot of them around, and they're the people, and they've got 3 awards, this guy I'm thinking of, and he's asked time and time again why he keeps applying. And he says, at expression of interest, if I'm good enough to get to full stage, I get 5 expert opinions on my project. If I had to put money together to get 5 experts to look at my application, that's going to be £50,000, I reckon. Apply. It may take a bit of your time. We understand it's not always the easiest process. We are trying our best, but we do have certain limitations. But think of the feedback you're getting and how that can also help you improve your application going forward. I wish you a lot of luck. I hope you really enjoyed this afternoon's session, because you're going to get a lot of information and a lot of chance to ask other people questions rather than listening to me drone on. Thank you very much for your attention. Good luck.